This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Mint Mobile. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast, the last one for 2023. It is Friday, December 29th, 2023, and I've got the excellent Jason Howell here with me. Hi, Jason. How are you?
Miriam, it's a pleasure. I'm doing well. You know, it's right between Christmas and New Year. My mom's visiting. We've done a lot of lounging around and doing nothing. So I'm happy to actually have something to do right now. If I'm honest.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up because I've done the same. It's very rare that I shut down to the extent that I have this year between Christmas and New Year's. I have literally not looked at my email in multiple days on purpose because this is going to be an insane month of January. And we're going to see some of this coming in the topics today because everyone is launching their Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 phones. Like right now, like it's coming in the next few days, CS included. So of course, some of them are not going to be released in the West or in North America right away. But the reality is this is stupid, right? We also know Samsung's launching very soon. So what's your take on this shifting of the Snapdragon release earlier, October this year, and now causing us to panic right during and after CS with new phone reviews?
Does it kind of feel like it's like what is the right analogy? I wanted to say snake eating its own tail, but I don't even know if that's the right analogy. But it seems to me like when we're talking about mobile phone and smartphone development, there is a constant need to be ahead of the rest and to be ahead of the curve and be the one that's in front of the other thing, because the amount of time where that attention is potent and powerful is you know, it's shrunk over the years. It's become such a small sliver. So in order to really captivate and capture that attention, things get shifting and earlier. And like maybe at some point, you know, 20 years from now, it will have made an entire turn around the calendar. We'll be back where it began. Who the heck knows?
That'd be hilarious. By that point, I'll be going to CS in my walker. But look, the reality is it's shaping up to be crazy. We know that OnePlus is coming up sometime soon with some stuff. We're going to talk about some of the leaks and rumors we're seeing around that. But at the same time, it looks like a major leak this past week, where Samsung's possible launch date is January 17th. So imagine we're back from CS around the 11th, right? We now have a week to calm down. Like, remember how we had nothing in January and then a little bit in February and then
February.
We'd go to MWC, but then last year they did Samsung early February, and we were really busy in February because we had to review the phones, then go to MWC. No, this year we're going to get that boom right after CS. That's what we're talking about. So do you think this is a credible thing?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that Evan blasts anytime I see a leak coming with Evan's name attached to it, I take it seriously. Which is not to say that anyone in, that's doing the work that Evan's doing is 100% accurate, but proven pretty accurate with Samsung when it comes to that. And I don't see any reason why that wouldn't happen. I trust it.
I think so too. I think it's going to be happening, and we're going to see the entire S24 series come out. That there's a lot of rumors around that we've covered before. It looks very evolutionary, but that's been kind of Samsung's MO lately, right?
It's all evolutionary, I feel like, at this point. And I think what's interesting to me about this, maybe I'll be proven wrong, and maybe it's actually not about Samsung in general, but just smartphones, kind of the wide spectrum of smartphones going into the year 2024. Samsung, the rumored Galaxy AI, which everybody has AI something or other, but I'm really excited to see. Here's my realization. Here's where I'm at, is that I'm less excited about hardware development right now. I'm really excited about software enhancements that I believe, as we, venture this year 2 post open AI, chat GPT and all the weird and cool potential things that AI can do. Now we're starting to see these companies really it's not like they've not done AI in their software experience before, but it's a new era of AI. And there's a lot more that I think is going to happen in the realm of making these devices far more useful for us in the ways that we may have assumed something like Google Assistant, or some people may have assumed that Bixby would be the one to do it. But you know what I mean? Like we had these ideas of what AI would do to really improve our use case of these devices. And I'm feeling pretty bullish that I think this kind of new era of AI, and Galaxy AI is what Samsung has going. I'm really curious to see, like, what are they going to do with this new power? Or this power that I assume is better than before? Like, especially with those chips coming on board that are really specialized for this type of work. That's what gets me really excited right now. Less about the hardware, more about like how is that software going to become much more useful to me?
Me too, but I feel like then it's going to make switching phones really difficult, right? I mean, unless it's baked into Android, right? And we're already seeing that, right? Pixel, like I'm still using a Pixel 8 Pro because I love the software experience. I love the call screening features. I love all that stuff. I love the magic erasers and unblurs and all that in photos, which is not fully trickled down to other phones. It's slowly making its way there, but the reality is, for me, if I look at last year's phone landscape, we did the top 5 phones. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that for last year, but I should say this year, 23. But by the time I publish, it'll be 24. So my point is for me, the OnePlus Open was the hardware, the product that really stood out as my top phone.
And you're not alone, yeah.
But at the same time, I can't use it as my daily because it's missing not even AI here. Not talking like edge AI, chat GPT type AI. We're talking like kind of dumb AI, I hate to say it that way, but like it's missing those cool features that Pixel delivers, which is why, in terms of primary communication device, like I'm basically on the Pixel for my day-to-day stuff. Except when I have to do a bit more work, then I have the Open in my other pocket for the foldable stuff. And then, of course, I got an iPhone for video, right? Because even the Pixel 8 Pro, it's still not quite there. It's much better. And I know that the low light thing where you send it to the cloud, it's just so slow and cumbersome. And, they finally, released that late last a week or two.
Yeah, like a couple of weeks ago.
And it's not to me, it's like it's AI, right? But it's not. So I want to see edge, like on device AI, like you're saying, right? And that's kind of where I think it's going to hit hard. But again, if Galaxy does their own thing, Pixel does their own thing, I feel like it's locking us into this ecosystem, and that's what I'm concerned about. As a longtime Android user, that's what I love about Android is the variety of the hardware. And I think there's still a lot of exciting stuff going on in the hardware, especially in cameras. And we're going to talk about some of that, but also in folding phones. I took me a while to really get into folding phones. First, it was the flip phones. I really love those because they're just like the same use case. Just you fold it in half, you put it in your pocket, but you're still using it like a regular phone. But then with the OnePlus Open, it was the first time I really was like, okay, I think I can use a book style, tablet style folding phone now. The software is there to make me more productive and it's intuitive. I don't feel like I'm having to learn too much new to make it work. And that's kind of why I'm still gung-ho about the hardware, because I feel like, yes, you're right. We're kind of plateauing in many ways. As like I said, this whole thing started with me saying, it's going to be very evolutionary, the S24. But that's also Samsung thing, right? Look at the folding phones they launched in the summer, in August. They were very evolutionary. It wasn't until OnePlus came along and said, let us show you how to make like Oppo really, right? Let us show how to make a folding phone. That's like the right way to do it. And then everybody's like, I think a lot of people got converted by that phone in our realm of
circle.
media, right? But my point is, if it converts us, right, then that's, I think, a significant step. And it was software, of course, but it was also hardware and software combined, right? The form factor of the Open, the aspect ratio of it, making it look like a regular, like essentially iPhone mini when it's closed, or maybe iPhone 14 or 15 base size, right? It's a smaller screen. I think that's kind of something that's still worth talking about. Like, I agree with you, like, but I'm a little concerned that with AI, we're going to get compartmentalized into these silos, and people, it's going to be iMessage all over again, right?
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, I do think that there's room for differentiation in the software front as well. Same as with hardware. I don't want I don't want an ecosystem in the world of Android where everything is the same and looks the same. Like there have been, I think my opinion on that has shifted and changed over time, because there have been Android experiences that are just, highly uncustomizable, and it is you get what you get. And then that kind of got dull and boring for all the things that it benefited from. It also just kind of got very bland and samey and unexciting. So I feel like I'm okay with the differentiation on the software front, given that it doesn't end up creating what you're talking about, creating some sort of experience that we all have a need or around, or that we rely upon, yet these phones aren't talking the same language. When it comes down to like AI customization and this phone offering something that's just incredibly useful on a day-to-day basis, that's outside of that like necessity realm and is just plain useful. Like, I guess the only thing I can point to, because it was completely unexpected for me, is Best Take on the Pixel 8 Pro. Because when I saw that announcement, I was like, okay, that's one of those features that's really neat on stage and everything, and I'm going to use it once, and I'm going to be like, okay, I'm never going to use that again. And then I had the most ideal situation to use it in, and now I'm like, okay, that I'm legitimately excited about that, and more features that really look into my life and make certain things possible that were really difficult before. Maybe not impossible, but were difficult. And I don't know. I'm looking for easier life via my phone. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, no, but that's why I'm saying, like, I'm hoping Google can bake that into Android. Like, China's still going to China, right? China's going to do their own thing. And we're going to talk about some phones from there, because they're kind of showing us where the hardware is going. But I think I'm talking here about, like, I'm concerned with Samsung AI, because we've seen this before. We've seen Bixby come and fail. Do you remember when the whole Galaxy S3, S4 time, when they were these pebble-shaped phones and everything was nature themed, remember? But they had a ton of custom features for Galaxy in there. Do you remember that? And some of them were really cool. Like, I mean, some of them were very gimmicky because Korea, it's a cultural thing. But at the same time, I think that at the core, some of these functionalities eventually made it into Android as default features, right?
We probably
like
take it for granted at this point.
Like the sharing via NFC and all that stuff. But I think that in that sense, I encourage Samsung to experiment, because, some stuff has stuck, like the Note has stuck, right? They still make a phone with a stylus silo. Some other stuff is stuck, like, so I don't want to discourage, but I'm a little concerned because AI is so personal. It gathers so much information, but I'm not talking about the privacy so much. Like, this can be done right. I'm just saying that it forces you into staying in Galaxy, right? In the same way as I'm already feeling this with Pixel. It's forcing me to stay with Pixel, the best shot, but not just that. Just think about all the calling features. For me, that alone, like the call screening.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I use it all. I get so much spam, right? Like, not spam, but like some unsolicited call, like trying to pitch me something. And I'm like, give them to my assistant. Have my 100%. Assistant deal with that. And it's funny because half the time people hang up, which is great because it's exactly what I want.
And the other half of the time, the transcript starts with,
exactly.
Hi.
But sometimes
because they're so taken off guard by it.
Yeah, but sometimes people are like, they actually say like, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm calling about that. Work. And then I pick it up, and then because then they're putting in the work. Okay. Like, this to me seems to be a feature that should trickle down to all of Android. Like, or maybe at least the Google phone app, right? Like, why is this exclusive to Pixel? You see? And so it's not just, I'm not just saying that about Samsung. I'm saying that about all the manufacturers. Like, this exclusive feature set has got to go. The whole point of Android was we just have slightly customized versions of the same experience, right? Not slightly, not like, oh my God, I can't move from this phone because I'm stuck in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little concerned with that. But look, this is going to sell like hotcakes. I'm sure that the people who are running S20s and S21s right now are going to buy this S24.
Instant upgrade, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's going to be the big audience. Don't expect magic. We talked a little bit about what to expect. The Ultra. The Ultra is going to have a 5 megapixel sensor in the middle instead of a 3. I think that's probably a good idea because That 200 megapixel sensor can be stretched to 5x probably pretty well. But hey, there's a lot of other phones coming, and in China, and some of them are going to be available in Europe too. So the Find X series from Oppo is always been their flagship, and it's always been imaging centric. It's like the Xiaomi Ultra series, or I don't know. They're like basically the Samsung Ultra as well. So the X7 and X7 Ultra is interesting because usually they call them X and then the Pro, right? So then last year was an X6 and X6 Pro. Previous to that, X5, X5 Pro. This year it's X7, X7 Ultra. I know. And then so they finally have there's a teasers that they've been officially showing all the angles of the phones. And yeah, they look very much like this design language you've seen on the OnePlus Open / Oppo Find N3, which is big round circular camera pod island mesa thing with like a whole splattering of telephotos and cameras and things. Yeah, and I'm excited about that because the rumors are, and we talked about it last week, is that that Litya stacked pixel sensor that gathers more light in the same surface area is in the OnePlus Open, and that is not a 1-inch sensor for the main. It's like it's a pretty big sensor, but it's not. They are making a 1-inch version of that sensor for this phone. So we're going to get, not only are we going to get a 1-inch sensor, but we're going to get a 1-inch sensor that gathers twice as much light as the previous champion. And so when you see some of the photography come out of these Chinese phones, like the Xiaomi 13 Ultra or the previous Find X6 Pro, it's really impressive. Or the current Vivo X100 Pro, which is this Dimensity 9300 Vivo flagship that came out when we were at MediaTek Summit in November, but it's not available in the West. So we're not sure if the Find S7 series is going to come out in the West yet. But at least we know what it's going to look like, and hopefully it does make it at least to Europe. So those of you who import your phones here will be able to enjoy it. And that's why I'm excited about this phone, because it's been a camera imaging monster for a while. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to play with them, but basically if you use a OnePlus phone, it's like, imagine your best OnePlus phone that's a bar phone with the cameras that are like out of control. That's basically what it is.
I mean, the camera module looks really impressive. The design, kind of the rear-facing design, like this two-toned kind of thing with, is that leather on the bottom? Like, is that legitimate, like leather embedded design?
Yeah, some of them have pleather. Like basically, like you've said, it's very much, you take the OnePlus Open. Like I have the green OnePlus Open and it's glass in the back. But if you have the black OnePlus Open, it's pleather in the back. And that's Oppo, like BBK Group has been doing. The Vivos also have the pleather back. The Realme that I'm playing with now, the GT5 Pro, is pleather back. It's a thing. It's a thing. I don't mind it. When that old camera vibe, when cameras had a leather. Yes. Yeah. It feels nice in hand. It's certainly less greasy to the touch than like glass.
Yeah. And it's got the kind of sticky, not sticky as in like tacky or anything like that, but that kind of resistant quality that isn't going to easily slip out of your hand, which is nice with the texture like that for sure.
And it's interesting because the Ultra is going to have Snapdragon Gen 3, and then the 7 is going to have the Dimensity 9300. And it's pretty much in line with what we've seen in the past with the previous versions, like the X6 series. So to me, what's standing out here is that essentially, if you look at this, and this is very BBK Group, very, very Oppo OnePlus kind of like inside baseball, is that this is a OnePlus 12 from everything that's leaked of the OnePlus 12, with the cameras even further, like crazier sets of settings for the camera, specs for the cameras. Whereas, right now, every leak that we've seen so far in rumor says that the OnePlus 12 is going to have the exact same cameras as the Open, right?
Okay.
So think of it as an Open with wireless charging and with a super bright 4,500 milliamp hour display, and not folding. That's what the OnePlus 12 is going to be, basically. So not too crazy. Oh, and Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which obviously, right?
Which, I mean, like half of these phones that we're going to talk about today.
So then if you want to go up from there, you can go to these phones from Oppo and get the crazier cameras, including that 1-inch Litya Sony sensor. So, and of course, I think it's 2 periscopes, or maybe like there's at least 2 telephotos on there. That's why there's 4 lenses.
Which makes me happy.
And they're all multi-megapixel too. And you know the other thing that I'm really excited about, Jason, and I hope you can get your hands on the new OnePlus phones, like the Open or the 12, because it's like the fact that they're spacing them out evenly. It's not like 1x, 3x, 10x, or 1x, 5x, like we have on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It's 1x, 3x, and then 6x by doing cropping of the periscope sensor. And that's what I love so much about the Open, is that you do get that progression, right? You get the sensor at 1x does its thing, then it crops the center losslessly to 2x, then you get 3x on the telephoto. Then it crops that because it's a 64 megapixel sensor to the center, and you get a 16 megapixel
How creative.
non-pixel bin. Yeah. And so, and then with this, I think they're adding a 10x or something, like I think they're adding a 6x. So you're getting a 6x, and then you can do 12x by cropping. See what I'm saying? So now you have this very linear zoom evolution. And that to me is like, it's a minor thing, but the camera hardware is constantly evolving to the point where, Apple just introduced 48 megapixels last year on their main sensor. And oh my God, they did their first periscope folded lens, kinda, on the Pro Max at 5x, but with a 12 megapixel sensor. These guys are doing 50, 64, 48 as their ultra wides, as every zoom lens has like multi megapixels. And so you can pixel bin in low light, but then you can also like crop in good light and get this almost lossless experience because those sensors are so big. The pixel sizes are like 1.2, 1.12 microns. So you're still doing some pretty decent work. Add OIS to that or in-body stabilization like some previous Find X's. And I think it's a pretty compelling package.
Yeah, and it's easy to look at the advances in camera technology on these smartphones in the last handful of years and think, oh my God, how does it get better? But that's so creative to be able to do that the way that you're talking about and kind of step through those multiple, more or less optical kind of zoom states. I mean, that's my favorite camera on cameras these days is the true optical zoom. I use it probably more than any camera, and I've gotten in the habit of backing away in order to use it, getting distance because and I do like the phone that I have is the Pixel 8 Pro. And so I use the zoom on the Pixel 8 Pro probably more than any other camera. And I enjoy having that option. So knowing that there's that many steps and still retaining that kind of that crispness quality of the image, that would make me very happy.
I mean, that's what surprised me the most about the Open is that not just for OnePlus, but for the entire BBK group universe, other than Vivo, who's always done excellent work with the X series, that they finally delivered a camera system that wasn't a camera-centric phone, right? Because the Open is really a folding phone. That was baseline better, in my opinion, than an iPhone, up there with the S23 Ultra and the Pixel 8 Pro, which is like amazing in its own right. And then so this X7 is taking up one more notch over that. So they're really getting serious. And, for Oppo, that was not too surprising. Oppo's always been slightly better than OnePlus at imaging, but I think that was artificially created. They wanted to keep OnePlus to be the lower rung. And now they're not doing that anymore. They're giving OnePlus the goods. And I think this is what's significant. Speaking of which, Realme, which is also like Realme is weird because I keep saying this, right? Like clearly OnePlus has been integrated into Oppo. So like if you look at the BBK group, you've got Oppo with OnePlus underneath it. You've got Realme and you've got Vivo, and Vivo has sub-brands too called IQOO. And they're kind of more affordable, right? And Realme is more affordable too. Like that's the idea. But what's striking to me about Realme is that they really should be part of Oppo and OnePlus there because they're so similar. The parts bin is almost identical. The software is very much virtually the same as ColorOS. So it's like, why haven't they been pulled in and integrated in this universe that Pete Lau has created where he wants Oppo to be the kind of the Uber brand? Why is Realme still a separate thing? I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Like they've integrated OnePlus now. the reason I'm bringing this up is because Realme, I've got the GT5 Pro, which is their current flagship, and it's a preview of what the OnePlus 12 is going to give us. It's essentially the same camera system as the Open and the 12, but with an 8 megapixel ultra wide. So they kind of cut the ultra wide down in terms of performance to make it a little more affordable and, place it in the lineup a little lower. Because here's the thing, Realme didn't used to make flagships that good. Their thing was always high speed charging. They did the 240 watt, right? And they did flagship processor and RAM and storage for a really affordable price point. And so they would sacrifice the camera. They would sacrifice like plastic frame, stuff like that. But now with this phone that I have in my pocket, the one I showed you guys last week, and I can show you again this week, which I've finally been using and taking photos with, and is kind of blowing my mind. This is it in a case here, but you can see this crazy camera pod, very reminiscent of the OnePlus Open Pod. And this camera is blowing my mind. It's really good. This is a China-only phone, right? But here's the thing. Realme is kind of edging into OnePlus 12. Like, this is possibly a better phone than the OnePlus 12R that's rumored. So, like, how is this possible? And then on top of that, we see this teaser that Realme just did of another periscope telephoto, possibly the same. Maybe they just slightly changed the cosmetics and they're coming out with this Chinese phone in India because Realme is huge in India. Or it could also be a more affordable mid-ranger with a periscope telephoto, which has happened before. Not from Realme, but from Oppo. Oppo has made mid-rangers with periscopes a few years back, the Reno series. So I don't know what to make of this, but what I'm trying to say is that I'm not quite sure I understand how Realme is still standing at his own brand when it's so similar to Oppo and OnePlus. And now it's going up market, right? So do you remember how OnePlus went up market and we're all like, and now it seems to be okay. Like I think the OnePlus Open shows that maybe the strategy of Oppo being the rest of the world brand and OnePlus being the Western brand is a good strategy for BBK Group. So what's your take on all of this?
Yeah, where does Realme stand in place? Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to have a take on this. I have had zero personal experience with Realme. So I have, no like firsthand experience to draw from as far as any sort of comparison between these three devices. But I would agree, as somebody who works in the technology journalism realm for a living, it's hard for me to even understand why a brand like Realme exists in the kind of umbrella of those other brands. And if it's hard for me to understand that, you better believe but is it important? But is that an important distinction for the wider public? If they see a phone, by Realme that satisfies a certain need or requirement that they have, does it really matter? I think as a brand, as a kind of an overall, brand strategy, it does matter, but it's super confusing to me. I don't understand the Realme.
I think you have to look at the historicals, right? What happened was Xiaomi started this, right? Xiaomi was like, we're making these phones, and then they're like, oh, India wants cheaper phones.
Right. Yeah.
So let's make Redmi as a cheaper brand. And they did that. And it was very successful. Then Oppo saw that and went like, BBK was like, holy crap, they're making so much money on these Redmi phones. Let's make our own brand. And of course, they called it Realme, like very close name, right? And then Realme existed. And Realme was a runaway success in India as well. But this is years ago. This is 3, 4, 5 years ago. This is pre-COVID times even. So at this point, it's all changed. The economy has changed everywhere worldwide. The globalization, the ease of import and manufacturing, and it's all changed. And so I think these brands don't necessarily reflect, like Redmi, some Redmi phones have gone up market. Some Realme phones are gone up market. So it's hard to tell. And I think because of that, it's more becoming a geographical play. Like I think Realme needs to exist right now because it's so strong in India. Like 100%. But what I don't understand is why it hasn't been folded into the Oppo bigger picture. Because Vivo really does its own thing over there. But you look at what Realme is doing, it's totally Oppo. It's an Oppo playbook, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's interesting to me. And related to all these camera news, we have a Micro Four Thirds rumor on a phone. And I am really taking this one with a grain of salt. Because look, the problem with this, it's not that it's impossible. Right? We've seen 1-inch sensors. The problem is the Z depth, right? Like you can't put a sensor that big on a phone without making it thicker or making the lens bump thicker, unless you use something like what Apple did with their weird folded design, which isn't perpendicular folded, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like it's stacked, like basically the signal path is like out and then sideways and out, right? Whereas a normal periscope is like a 90-degree angle kind of thing. So unless you do something like that, and maybe that's the thing, maybe there's now optics that let you do this with a probably very larger bump, but not a bump that's to the point where you can't put the phone in your pocket. So if that's the case, cool. But at the same time, you know how it is with those big sensors. One of the problems with 1-inch, in my opinion, as much as I love it because I kind of love the flaws of 1-inch sensors. I love the super shallow depth of field. And I love the fact that you get that weird, like all the defects you get on the edges, you know?
The distortions,
Distortion, chroma aberrations, all these things, right? So to me, that's kind of why I'm like, okay, let's try this. But at the same time, I'm like, ugh. And then if you have this, you need variable aperture, which a lot of the new 1-inch phones now have, like the Xiaomi 14 Pro and I think the 13 Ultra before it had like 2 sets of apertures, and the 14 Pro has continuously variable aperture from 1.4 to 4.0 or something. So then if you have variable aperture, then you don't have that shallow depth of field issue anymore, right? But that adds another layer, right, of complicated mechanics between your sensor and your lens. And I'm sure that can be reliable. I'm not worried about the reliability of it. I'm just more like, how does it not get very expensive and very complicated very quickly and add to that thickness, right?
Yeah. I think the thickness is a real big consideration, real big question that I had reading through this, is that we've been in a race to, miniaturize, or rather thin-nearize our devices. That's not a word. Make our devices thinner. And this would kind of, I would guess anyways, outside of any, special technology voodoo, go counter to that. But I mean, yeah. And as I think about this, I'm like, okay, but if it creates a smartphone imaging situation that is different, like the quality is just insane, or the stylistic output is something that you have a hard time replicating with other smartphones, people might be okay with that. At the same time, we're also in this realm of smartphone photography, and have been for quite a few years now, of computational photography that's doing an insane bit of work to kind of recreate some of these qualities and be pretty darn effective in that. So maybe it's totally unnecessary, but I'm super interested to see if this actually happens. I think it's a really interesting idea.
I mean, this can go 2 ways, right? One way is somebody does it, like the first company, it was Sharp with Aquos in Japan, made a 1-inch camera. They worked together with, I want to say Leica on it. And it wasn't, the phone wasn't good, the camera wasn't that great, but hey, we put a 1-inch sensor in a phone.
Did it. Yeah.
But then, people didn't let that sit. At first, we thought this is a one-off, it's not going to take off based on the performance and the results. But then Xiaomi did it, and they did it right. And then Oppo did it, and they did it right. And so now we have a history of 1-inch sensors at work. So maybe it's going to be the same. Somebody does it, it's an outlier, and everybody's like shaking their heads. And then maybe somebody takes it and does it better like 2 or 3 years down the road.
Right.
Or it's totally just an outlier and it stays that way because it's just not practical with today's science, right?
Yeah.
We'll see.
How much of a difference has because I haven't had direct, again, I should, reiterate, All About Android, the show that I did for a very long time, went away mid-year. And once that was canceled mid-year, I kind of went through a desert moment with Android, right? I was not very close to it on a daily basis the way I had been. So there's a lot of things that have happened in recent months / the last year that I haven't had a whole lot of direct experience with. 1-inch sensors being kind of one of those. I want to get a camera or a phone that has, one of those 1-inch sensors to play around with it. But what is the quality difference that you see aside from the like quirky elements that you're talking about? Like, does it create better photos than the photos that we're used to in some of the top line phones that we're using?
It really does. It looks more like a real camera. You know, that it's intangible thing.
Right.
You look at a phone,
real
you're like,
air quotes,
that was taken with a DSLR, or you get more of that vibe. And I think some of it is a shallow depth of field, but I also think it's just in general you get more detail, more light, right? especially in low light, like in portrait photography, becomes delightful. It's just a lot of little things that just add up to a slightly better experience. And some people don't like it. Some people are like, they want that more smaller sensor vibe that you get on an iPhone or even a Pixel or a Galaxy, because they're like, it looks too artsy, or whatever, right? Like, I think there is different, like the average person out there who just smashes the shutter button and hopes to capture their kids, right? The reason a lot of them are on iPhones is because it just works, right? Like, I mean, it's not going to be the best photos ever, like to people like you and me who maybe care more about photography. But there's something to be said about a consistency thing. I think this 1-inch sensor stuff, Oppo and Xiaomi made it happen such that it still works well automated, but it's really shines more, and Sony's done it too on the Xperia. It shines more when you start playing with the settings a bit, and start experimenting a little bit, especially on the ones that have variable aperture, and then it starts to become real fun. But the average person doesn't care about that, right?
Yeah, they're not going through those steps. Yeah.
But the first time I saw, like, I have the Xiaomi 13 Pro non-ultra. It has the 1-inch sensor, but doesn't have the variable aperture. And the first time I saw the photos come out of that, I was like, oh yeah, I'm very pleased with that. Well, it also helps that Xiaomi has partnered with Leica, so they have the Leica color science.
Sure.
In the same way as BBK Group has partnered with Hasselblad on the Oppo OnePlus side and with Zeiss on the Vivo side. So, that's also another thing that we don't talk about. There is the hardware, which we just talked about a lot. There is the AI computational photography software, which Google is still, I think, the master of. And then there is the color science. And the color science, right now, I really like what I'm seeing coming out of the companies that have partnered with traditional photo camera manufacturers. I like Hasselblad, but I also like what Leica, and I also like what Zeiss is doing. It's different flavors but it's definitely unmistakably adds a flavor to the photography that, again, makes it more like, oh yeah, I feel like you're really using a real camera. And I think for some people that's great, and some people don't care.
Yeah, interesting.
Moving on to more OnePlus news. Okay, so we talked about it earlier. Like, all these phones, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 are coming out, but that also means that the 8 Gen 3 is probably a pretty expensive chip, right? So the 8 Gen 2 is a very, very solid chip still. And in the same way as we saw a lot of phones come out last year with the 8 Plus Gen 1, we're going to see a lot of more mid-range-ish flagship or affordable flagships, as it were, come out with 8 Gen 2. And the rumors are that we're going to get a OnePlus 12R in the West for the first time. The R series has been reserved to India as a kind of cut down. So think of the T version. Remember OnePlus 10T, 11T? There wasn't an 11T this year, but there would be. If there would be, there would have been. I think there was an 11R in India. So my point is, R and T are kind of similar. They cut down a little bit on specs, and you get a lower price point. You get a flagship experience. So supposedly we're getting a 12R. But here's what's interesting. The specs are out. And more importantly, there's word of a Ace 3 coming on January 4th in China. But that Ace 3 looks identical to the 12R. And the Ace naming has always been reserved to OnePlus in China. So I think, to me, I'm not sure 100% here, but what I'm thinking is happening here is, if you look at the news for the week of January 4th, if you can get past all the CS stuff, you're going to see that this phone is going to be the same as the 12R ultimately. Basically. So what bothers here the most is that the 12R rumors are, I'll paraphrase, but it's basically a OnePlus 11 with the display from the OnePlus 12 and maybe slightly lesser cameras. And that's basically it. So Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, like the 11, possibly no wireless charging, but I'm not sure. And slightly similar camera pod, slightly lesser camera. I think instead of the telephoto, there's a macro, but that's all speculative right now, right? We don't know. But the point is, it's possible that you'll have a choice between a very expensive OnePlus 12 and a more affordable 12R here in the US.
Okay. And that doesn't strike me as odd or out of place. Like you said, the T release, save for the 11, we here in the US, we were used to seeing the T release kind of come in.
But 6 months later, so it's interesting it's at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Having it at the same time. I wonder, This kind of reminds me of, when Samsung kind of shuffled things around. They used to have, their Note series later in the year, and then that kind of moved up because the later in the year ended up being the foldable. Now you've got the open. Maybe OnePlus is kind of following a similar playbook.
I think you're right. Yeah. And I think, it's exciting to me because I feel like if they do this right, this really depends on the pricing. Like, I'm sure both phones are going to be great. Yeah. Right. For me, it's clearly the $12 one because I want the better cameras and I want wireless charging. And why not go with the 8 Gen 3? By the way, that Realme GT5 Pro that I all showed you on the image, for those of you watching the Patreon video, that one has an 8 Gen 3 in it. So it's super fast. I think they're going to be great. The question is, how great are they going to be for their money? Because this is going to be announced roughly around the same time as the Galaxy, or just a little after. So, they better be competitive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're going up against one of the biggest heavy hitters that there is. You better have something special. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll see. So basically, we just spent a lot of time talking about Oppo, Realme, OnePlus, because again, this shift of scheduling of the new Snapdragon and MediaTek chips has made all these phones coming out in the next basically few weeks, early January. This in China, at least for some of them, and the West apparently for the OnePlus and the Samsung. Another thing that seems to be more MWC focused, Mobile Congress in February, late February, early March, is the Nothing Phone 2A. Last week I mentioned that it had leaked. We saw that the back design, even though it was in a case that hid the back, that the camera layout was very different. So it means that they're not following the same aesthetic as Phone 1 and Phone 2. So they're going to have a new glyph of some kind, I guess. But the specs have leaked and the price is sub €400, which, doesn't really translate. If that phone even makes it to the US, which I'm not convinced it will at this point, to be frank, because I don't think, getting carrier approval and stuff like they did for Nothing Phone 2, it took a year, right? They did the one, it didn't come out in the West, or in the US, I should say. And then we got the 2, which is a great phone. But the 2A, I don't think we're going to see. But what's interesting is the specs. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, nothing is, again, they're all playing from similar playbooks between themselves. Nothing has a pretty small catalog of devices right now. And I think it really, is in a position, it's produced a couple of very interesting phones that they would, of course, like to get a lot more kind of brand movement on. And a great way to do that is to kind of lower down the specs and water down the specs a little bit, come out with a mid-range that's competitive, which we know that Nothing Phone can make their devices competitive based on what we've seen from the 1 and the 2, and put a nice, solid mid-range price on it. If it's, if that ends up, I mean, I don't know what that would translate into US dollars, is that close to $400, somewhere around there, which sounds about right for me. I mean, it makes sense to me for Nothing to have a phone in this range. I think there's a part of me that's a little surprised that they're doing this so quickly, because other manufacturers like OnePlus, if we had to compare against, it took them a while to kind of ramp up to this point, and Nothing's going for it.
Well, I think Calpe has a lot of experience from the first time around, and I think that his end goal is an exit. Like, I think that's what clearly is happening here, right? Like, he's already launched, Nothing has already launched a line of affordable earbuds and smartwatch in India, right? So we've never seen those products. Now, the only way I can see this coming to North America is as a competitor to Pixel 7a. If you look at the specs right now, the only thing that's kind of downgraded really from the Phone 2 is the Dimensity 7200, which is mid-range-ish. It's not a Snapdragon 8 something, right? So that is the first sign that but the display looks solid. AMOLED, 1080p, 120 hertz. We got two 50 megapixel sensors here, ultra wide and regular. Both are not crappy. They're not awesome. We'll have to see. Like, I have a feeling this is really geared at India, right? I'm not sure we'll see this in North America. But if we do, I think it could compete well with like a Galaxy A series or a Pixel something A. And again, the A nomenclature is really interesting here, I think Kyle is really kind of going for it. Like he's like, I'm just gonna go and put my feet right in the middle of the ocean here.
And when you're talking mid-range, like I don't know that, if it did come to the US that you would then necessarily see any of these devices inside of a carrier store. But I could envision a future where you go into a carrier store and like it's a sea, it can often be a sea of mid-range phones. And it's like, well, I don't even know which one's the right one. Which one is the person who I'm talking to choosing to sell me on. But you better believe a mid-range device that does all the interesting glyphy things on the very back.
It's cool, right?
That would be a big selling point. I mean, that would certainly catch the eyes and attention of people going in that circumstance.
And this phone also is very similar to another phone that we actually do get here in the West, in the US and Canada, which is kind of flown under the radar this year, which is the Moto Edge 2023, not the Edge Plus, which was their super bonker flagship that they did in July that quickly got eclipsed by the Razr. But that was a really solid phone, the Edge Plus. But they also did the Edge, which came out in the fall. I've been using that phone on and off, and it's like a completely fly under the radar. It's really good. And it's also MediaTek Dimensity 7200. And it's also got a 50 megapixel main sensor. But it's really thin. It's metal and glass. Actually, it's metal and vegan leather. So it's really well made. It has wireless charging and, tons of storage, and it costs like $400-ish, right? So my point is that this is exactly like there are now phones in the US, which really makes me happy, beyond the Pixel A series that are solid mid-ranger, like kind of like almost flagship level in some ways, but not quite, And so I think, it's very possible that nothing could decide to come and play in this area here in North America. But I have a feeling that they're going to focus on the MWC launch. They're going to focus on India and Europe first, right?
Yeah, that's my feeling too. Absolutely.
Let's see. We got another final phone thing. It's more like, I missed mentioning this on a previous show, but Honor is partnering with Porsche Design. Does this sound familiar? Honor, who came out of Huawei, partnering with Porsche Design, who Honor did a bunch of high-end phones with. I love Honor, but I really feel like some weird way that we can't put together, they're still kind of attached to Huawei some way. Like, because the OS is so similar. The specs sheets on the devices is so similar. Like, they keep coming out with RYYB sensors on their phones. Who did RYYB? Huawei did, right? Like, it's just weird. Like, I know they're separate companies and all, but So anyway, that's a thing now. We're going to see Porsche Design Honor phones. Are you ready for this?
Yeah. Did you show off? I guess a couple of weeks ago there were some leaked designs of these devices, and I was looking at a few of those. And I mean, that there's like a pearl white variant that I would say I liked a little bit better than the red and gray two-tone approach. I mean, I never know who is the market for these devices. I know it's not me. I'm not
Rich
a car
Chinese
person. Is it rich Chinese? Like, I've got my phone's got to match my vehicle in some way, shape, or form,
it's not
or
even
it's an
that.
aspirational
it's like
play.
my phone says Porsche on it.
Yeah, right. It's aspirational then.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, look,
I don't know.
I'm not. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just raising an eyebrow for me again.
Yeah.
Honor, what are you? Can you please create your own identity? Because I do not understand what you are. And I when I was gathering the news for this podcast, there's so much other Honor news right now that I just skimmed over because I'm going to focus on their folding phones and their flagships. They are launching so many phones right now, especially in China, that I can't keep track anymore. And a lot of them are very interesting. There's a mid-ranger they just announced called the X50 GT that has a variable aperture lens on the mid-ranger. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's cool, but like, can we please make sense of our lineup here? Because I'm not, like, it's very clear to me that the Magic numbered phone, right, is the flagship. Like Magic 5 last year and Magic 6 coming up for MWC, I'm sure. But beyond that, there's the Magic V series, which are the V for folding, right? And they're great. Like, the V2, I don't know if you know this because you were out for a while there, but the V2 is the thinnest book style, tablet style folding phone in the world. It is thinner than an iPhone 14 Pro Max when shut.
Wow, that is impressive.
Okay. And it's not a crappy phone. Like, it's one of the best foldables of 2023. And so, like, it's China only. it supposedly is going to come out in the West. Their PR person is amazing, and she was telling me, stay tuned for like MWC basically for, potential news on this, a variant of this phone coming out. But it's so thin, and when it's shut, it feels like you're just using a candy bar phone, right? And I think that's kind of where the OnePlus Open is kind of going. It's not quite there because it's a little thicker. But like, I think ultimately 2-3 years from now, when book-style folding phones are a thing for every manufacturer, we're going to see them being about the same as a candy bar, normal phone, that just happens to open.
I mean, I'm for that. I know.
All for
How
that. Can we not be excited
Absolutely.
about that, right?
Yeah,
like,
that'd
this
be
is
fun.
cool. So that's it for Honor News. Last couple of things. Somehow Apple was able to appeal the ban, and the ban has been paused. What's your take on this whole Apple Watch fiasco?
I mean, it's a little confusing to me to understand. I mean, so much happened this week when this was, in relation to this story. I mean, it was banned. White House backed it. Appeals court then comes and reverses the order. And who knows, about how long these things are going to be sold. I mean, at the end of the day, patents were found to be infringing. I mean, there needs to be some sort of resolution around this. And I don't think that Apple as a company, just because they have mountains upon mountains of money resting on top of mountains of money, should be, impervious to any sort of actual punishment around this just because they're Apple. But yeah, so I don't know exactly how I feel about this. Obviously, this is just temporary, and I don't know when it's going to reach its resolution.
I mean, I think Apple should do the right thing and resolve this somehow. But I also feel that part of the problem here, this is the vibe I'm getting, and I don't like this vibe. The CEO of Massimo, whatever the company is called, that is saying that patent got infringed, got all high horsey on social media about it, and it's a European company, and he has that very European attitude of like, you owe us something. And I think it's not helping the battle. Like, I think a very calm approach of saying, hey, this is a conflict we have with Apple. We're wanting to work with you to resolve it. Money should be exchanged. And can we make that happen? I think that would happen. But they're very combative about it. They're using the opportunity that this is Apple to do like, look, big bad tech. And I'm like, F off, okay? Like, somebody actually corrected me on Threads, I think it was, and I want to thank them because I used the word patent troll last week because it comes across to me like that. Like I'm 100% believe that Apple could have infringed on a patent. It happens all the time.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
They should make it right. But at the same time, Massimo, the way they're approaching this is just not like, it's not right. And I know they're the underdog. Yeah, whatever. Come on. You can't be the underdog if you're a massive company that makes, healthcare equipment. You know how much that stuff sells for. They make a huge profit on that stuff. Like, don't play the victim. I don't like it. I just don't think it's right. It makes you come across as petty.
There aren't a lot of companies out there that would find themselves in the position to have any sort of semblance of control over a company like Apple. And so I think you're absolutely right. They are in a position where they recognize, okay, we've got something on them. How do we play this to the end and, maximize kind of from an attention standpoint, from a monetary standpoint, how do we maximize all these things? And so that's part of their strategy is really leaning into this. And yeah, I don't know that I necessarily agree that that's the right approach, but I also understand why they might choose to do that. Not many companies find themselves in that position.
I think this should be resolved. I think they should get what they, what the value of their patent back from Apple. Absolutely. And Apple can certainly cough that money out. So, but it's just the whole thing is just feeling weird to me. Speaking of watches and smartwatches, there's strong rumors that Fossil is going to be dropping Wear OS in future smartwatches. The initial rumor was that they might stop making watches. I don't think that's going to happen. They have too much invested in, all these brands like Diesel and Mont Blanc and whatever else. I don't know if Mont Blanc is part of them, but like there's a whole bunch of brands. And clearly they have not been happy with their partnership with Wear OS because they haven't updated their watches. They haven't really delivered on the features that they were going to deliver. I don't know what went wrong there. I'm not surprised though, and I'm calling it now. We're going to see them adopt some kind of real-time OS, which is similar to what like the OnePlus watch did and all the Chinese watches are doing these days. Like 2-week battery life, you know, you get your notifications, you get like some kind of voice assistant, you get your health and fitness tracking, but you don't really get like apps in the sense of what we have on Wear OS.
Really seemed for a while there like the fashion brand element of smartwatches was Wear OS's saving grace. Like Wear OS in general wasn't, you know, catching a lot of the right kind of attention. And at a certain point, I'd say in the, you know, last 2, 3, maybe 4 years, the fashion brand element kind of came into play. And I was like, okay, well, at least I suppose if it exists to, you know, for these fashion brands, then that's something versus nothing. But so it is a little interesting to see a little change in the direction of the wind there. How is this going with other fashion brands is my question. Like, you know, there are other brands that have been relying on Wear OS. Are they making similar changes right now? Because I mean, they have to go up against, you know, especially now with the kind of the modern version of Wear OS and Google owning Fitbit. Yeah. You know, that's a strong kind of comparison point. Samsung Health is actually pretty damn solid. So, you know, it's not the Android wearable market now, I feel like, is a little different than it was 3 to 4 years ago when it was struggling. And I don't feel like it's struggling as much anymore. I think it still has a long way to go. But yeah, so I'm just kind of curious if there's other fashion brands that are following
my
the same
understanding
direction.
right now is there's really 3 big players: Samsung, Google with the Pixel Watch, and Fossil Group.
Yeah.
That was it. Like, wow. Garmin uses their own stuff.
Yep.
Then there's all the Chinese who use their own stuff. And, you know, Oppo still, I think, makes a Wear OS watch, but like they're a minor player, right? And it's only sold in China and it's heavily customized. But like at this point, it's like, so I have a Galaxy Watch 6 Classic here, I think, the one with the bezel that rotates. I can't remember what model that is. And it's great. It's basically reminds me very much of the Tizen watches from the days before, which I also really liked. I used to have a first gen Pixel watch for like 9 months last year, and I liked it too. You're wearing the new one, I guess.
I'm wearing the new one,
Yeah, I have the new one. I haven't set it up because I like bigger watches, and this fits my wrist better. So I'm just going to stick with the Samsung.
Definitely a smaller watch, yeah.
But look, the reality is I'm happy with the experience. Both are slightly different, but similar enough, and you can set them up. Like everything works more or less the same. I've got Google Pay on my Samsung watch. I've got the assistant from Google on my Samsung watch. So I'm happy. I got what I need. But the reality is, you know, you look at what Apple's doing and it's still nothing comes close. Like I just like, I'm not sure you want that though. Like I was very happy with those Chinese watches with 2-week battery life from Huawei back in the day, the GT series, and the OnePlus watch. Once they fixed all the bugs, which literally took 3 months, but they did eventually. That's the sad story, is that they launched a watch and it was a dud because the software was unfinished and we all panned it, except I could see that it was going to get resolved. And so my review is more positive, but you know, that watch ended up being okay in the end, but like the reputation was killed.
Too little,
right?
too late. Yeah, totally.
So I'm willing to live with a lesser smartwatch, as it were, one that lasts longer in battery life, just does the basics. But if I have to live with one that integrates well with my Pixel right now, honestly, it's more likely to be the Galaxy Watch than the Pixel Watch because of aesthetic and sizing preference. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Android Faithful, you know, I just joined that a couple of weeks ago. And the last episode that we did for patrons was all about kind of like favorite kind of, hardware, but also news threads of the year and everything like that. And I'll tell you, I was actually really surprised at my own pick because at the top of my list was the Pixel Watch 2. And the reason that I was surprised about that is because time and time again, I have tried to do the wearable thing and fought to figure out why I might feel motivated to keep charging it at the end of the night and putting it on my wrist every single morning. And for whatever reason, and it's still a little intangible for me, but the Pixel Watch 2 has really kept my attention. and made me, it made me really optimistic about the current state of Wear OS and kind of what I need out of this. I don't need all of the features, like you're talking less features, but it does the basics, but it's still smart enough. Like that, and has like a long battery life. Like that's kind of ideal for me because I'm not really using mine to track my sleep. Like I have no interest.
But that's the thing. These Chinese watches do all this really well. They track your steps, your sleep, they integrate with Google Fit. Like none of that is a problem. It's just you don't get the actual apps like Google Maps and,
right.
the actual equivalent apps like an Uber app for your watch or whatever. But I never use that. All I want is notification.
Totally.
I want notification. I want my health and fitness stuff. Like they come with basic fitness tracking, any like auto activity detection and everything. And it integrates nicely with Fit and other like Fitbit and other system through the app on your phone, right? That talks to the watch. And they do sleep and they do, as I said, notifications. But the great thing about them is they're these nice watches with OLED displays that last 2 weeks on a charge. And,
that sounds great.
They're water resistant. You can go swimming. They have swim detection, all that. I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that when you are used to the Apple way of doing things, where you literally have apps you can install on your watch that really take advantage of the hardware, and to a lesser extent Wear OS, this is not what you're getting. So for me, I can live without it. You sound like you can live without it, but I think a lot of people could live without it if they tried. It's just that they're convinced because of Apple that there's no other way, which is why Samsung keeps making these pseudo Apple Watch competitors, Wear OS. And Pixel, of course, is going to do Wear OS because, well, it's Google.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, quickly want to mention that Xiaomi's SU7 EV is officially out and is basically targeting the Porsche Taycan, which is Porsche's very, only EV right now, and a very, very fast, very, very competitive in terms of performance EV. It does have a very similar greenhouse glass shape to the Porsche Taycan. The front end's very different. Look, I wrote an entire article in Tech Radar a while back about how, car makers are making phones in China, EV makers, and phone makers are making EVs in cars in China as well.
Interesting.
So you got Xiaomi making an EV. We have Huawei's made a bunch of EVs now in partnership, of course, with Chinese state-owned car manufacturers, right? And this is the partner for this car for the Xiaomi is Beijing Automotive, which is an EV maker in China. And then Polestar, for example, the Volvo sub brand that's owned by Geely or Geely in China, which is an EV only brand now. Polestar has a phone for their cars in China called the Polestar phone because Geely, whatever you say, the parent company acquired Meizu, so they made essentially a version of their Meizu flagship with Polestar branding for their Polestar cars in China. I want some of these phones to come to the West. NIO, the EV maker from China, has a NIO phone who is made by who knows what, but it's a super high-end flagship, like $900, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, crazy cameras, metal and glass, like superb, but it integrates seamlessly with the ecosystem of the car. So, maybe Tesla will make a phone in China. But I think in the West, it doesn't really work because everybody's on Android or iOS.
Yeah, totally.
In China, of course, you do that because everything is highly integrated vertically, right? Your Xiaomi phone has Xiaomi Cloud and Xiaomi Assistant in China. It has its own OS now. They're coming out with their own OS in China, right? It's Android-based still, but they're renaming it from MIUI to something else. And so of course their car is going to run that OS, and of course if you get a phone, it's seamless, right? That's something I think it's hard for us to wrap our heads around here in the West. It's cool, though.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, would Samsung ever be the one to attempt to do something like this? Like,
so they could, because Samsung makes cars in Korea in partnership with Renault Nissan. So they could potentially make an EV, but even better, they could partner with their the next big company in Korea, which is the Hyundai Group. Hyundai Group owns Kia and Genesis and makes EVs that are really great. As we know, Kia and Hyundai came out with great cars like the Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, EV6, and the upcoming EV9, which is going to be a 7-seater, 3-row SUV. the point is, they could partner with them and do I think it's going to be, again, Korea only. Even Korea, people are preferring iPhones now. Samsung's in deep trouble because in their own market, they're struggling right now to stay number one. So I don't know. Wow. I think China, it just works because of this super vertical ecosystem. And that's why Tesla kind of has that too. So they could probably do that in China. I don't know. It's interesting.
It is fascinating, though.
I love it, though. I love the idea that instead of CarPlay and Android Auto that project your phone onto the car system, that you log in with your Google ID, like Polestar does. They have Google Automotive on their cars in the West. Or like, imagine you could log in with your Apple ID and it'd be like an iPad. It transfers everything over. You don't have to worry about your phone. Where's your phone? It'd be like your Apple Watch. You can use the car, get access to all the stuff that's normally on your contacts, your apps, your maps, your things, whatever. It just works. And of course, some stuff is blocked when you're driving, but some stuff is, everything is available when you're stopped, which Android Automotive doesn't do right now. Android Automotive is very much a small subset of what a normal phone or tablet can do, which I think is a mistake. I think it should be basically like a total Android tablet. And then when you hit the drive, lever, like to put the car in drive, it doesn't let you do some stuff or only lets you access certain things by voice, right? But that's fine because I understand the safety concerns. But I still think that it would be great that when the car is stopped, that it's just an Android tablet there.
Yeah.
With your login, with you logged in and all your stuff. So I think that's kind of how the Chinese are playing it, right? And I want to see how that evolves. I'm very excited about it because I think that, once you understand that EVs is just basically a whole bunch of computer software and hardware on top of a big battery pack, motors, and inverters to control the motors, at that point, it's all software and computer that runs the show. So it's not quite the same as a regular car.
Yeah, it's hilarious to kind of look at it and be like, oh yeah, it makes sense that a smartphone company might actually get into the EV game. Like on one hand, from a technology perspective, I suppose it makes sense. But on the other hand, they are so completely different, like just from a size factor, right? Like from the thing that you carry around and rely on every day because it's sitting in your pocket and does all these things, to the thing that takes you to all the places that you go because it's so enormous that that's. But
they're both mobile devices because they let you roam around, right?
One is mobile because it fits in your pocket. The other is mobile because it goes.
You get
places.
into it. Yes. Yeah. Listen, Jason, we should wrap up. Do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet? All the new things you're doing, all the exciting new things you're doing. Come on.
Yeah, no, it's been a really crazy month. I no longer work at Twit. So I've joined the cast at Android Faithful. So if you go to androidfaithful.com, you can subscribe to the weekly news podcast. It's basically all about Android next generation, TNG. But if you want to follow what I'm doing, just do freejasonnewsletter.com. That's the Substack that I set up. That's like an announcement point because I am working on a number of projects that I'm planning to announce. Few in the next month or so. So if you subscribe there for free, you'll know when I have something. And then I think the final thing is just patreon.com/Jason Howell, because some people have asked, like, how can I support you directly? And hey, I'm not going to say no. So patreon.com/Jason Howell. And Miriam, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been fun hanging out with you today.
Oh, you bet. Do you still have your band?
Well, I still write music. I haven't had a band in a very, very long time, but yeah, I still write music. And that's certainly part of what I want to do now that I'm, kind of independent and doing my own thing. I get to kind of craft a career around me, and hopefully it works. That is, maybe closer to the things I really enjoy. Music is definitely one of them. I think that's going to be part of the grand kind of spectrum of what I'm doing. I still have to figure out how I work that in, but I want to. That's my plan.
Sweet. Well, folks, I'm subscribed to the newsletter. So right now, pause the podcast and go subscribe to Jason's newsletter. I'll put a link in the show notes. Okay.
Thank you.
And then you know where to find me, folks. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL on all the social. It's like the comic book character Tankgirl. Just drop all the vowels. That's me on Instagram. That's me on Threads. That's me on Twitter. That's me on Blue Sky. So find me there. Talk with me and Jason there. Instagram is where I put pretty pictures of phones, cars, travel, travel, food, all the cool stuff. I'm not big on reels. It's mostly photos for me. So, I'm just letting you know. And then the podcast list at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on all the major podcast apps, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, whichever of those are still around. Subscribe, tell your friends. If you want to, you can even join the RSS feed that's at the URL I just mentioned. So there's a YouTube channel, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast, with some content there, some videos, unboxing, hands-ons, that sort of thing. So you know what to do with YouTube. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the bell, comment, all that good stuff. And of course, there's a Patreon if you want to support me. After you go support Jason, go support me. Patreon.com/TankGirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. There's a video version of the podcast. You can get that ahead of the audio version a couple of days generally in advance. And you get to see us and show our phones and see our facial expressions and basically be a little bit more personal. I also sometimes leave outtakes when we do something silly. So check that out. And then if you can help that way, that'd be great. If you don't want to help that way, there's another way. There is a PayPal link in the show notes. Click through there, make a donation so I can support my coffee habit. I'd appreciate it. And also, I want to thank our sponsor, Mint Mobile. You know I review a lot of phones, so I'm constantly juggling multiple devices. While that's fun, it also means I'm spending a lot of money for wireless service on multiple SIMs. Thankfully, there's Mint Mobile, and that's who I'm teaming up with for today's podcast. If you want to save money on your wireless service, switch to Mint Mobile. You've probably seen the Mint Mobile ads featuring Ryan Reynolds, but let me quickly tell you how fantastic their service is, especially for tech-savvy early adopters like us. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for as low as $15 a month, and you don't have to sacrifice any coverage, speed, or data. They're built on the nation's largest 5G network. They keep costs low because they sell direct to you online. They cut out the retail stores and salespeople. Why should you pay more than you have to for access to the same network? In my experience testing phones, Mint Mobile delivers the same data speeds and call quality as the big three for a fraction of the cost. Switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to their eSIMs, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your home. No more standing around waiting in line at a big wireless store. You can keep your current devices and phone number and easily switch services. And if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, Mint will ship you a new SIM card free of charge. The whole process only takes 15 minutes, and if you get stuck, Mint has a great customer service team to get you through it. All Mint Mobile plans include unlimited nationwide talk and text, plus lightning-fast 5G and free mobile hotspot. Mint will show you how much data you use each month and recommend plans that save you money. Mint also offers a modern family plan that lets you set up a super affordable family plan with as little as 2 lines. Use my link, mintmobile.com/mobiletech, to get premium wireless starting at $15 a month. Stop paying more than you need on your wireless bill and start saving big with Mint Mobile. And thanks again, Jason, for being my guest this week.
Thank you, Miriam. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Of course, we'll have you on at some point in the future. And folks, we'll have another show next week. So please stay tuned for that. And until then, cheers, everybody.
Bye.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.